Have you ever found yourself in a tight spot where you need to quickly shift where your back wheel is on the trail? Today we're going to learn a skill called the pivot, which is the easiest and most effective way to lift up our back wheel and put it down exactly where we want it to go. The pivot technique is actually just a handful of different movements put together. So what we're going to do in this video, we're going to break it back apart. We're going to focus on each one of those elements, and then when we feel confident, we're going to put it back together, and just like that, we'll have pivots on lock. My name is Aaron, and today on Jenson USA, we're going to break down this complex skill so that you can quickly learn it and apply it to your own riding. The pivot is a combination of an endo, a back wheel lift, and a front wheel twist. We're going to focus in on each one of those elements and how they fit together, and then at the end of this video, I'm going to give you a couple drills that you can take and practice to help you further lock in this pivot technique. Before we dive into the technique, there's one tip that I want to give you that will help you learn all this stuff a lot easier, and that is to lock out your suspension when you're first learning a skill. Now, the reason why we do this is that we're moving quite a bit on the bike and we're trying to get the bike to do what we want it to do. And suspension can sometimes mask what the bike is actually doing by diving into the suspension. So when you lock it out, you get the true feel for what the bike is actually doing. And it's a better way to learn exactly how your body and bike work together to get these techniques to work. Once you figure out how it all works and you feel confident with the technique, then it's time to open the suspension back up. But if you want one tip to make all of this easier, lock out your suspension. The first and most important element in the front wheel pivot is being able to do what's called an endo. An endo is when you roll along slowly on your bike and grab some front brake. As you grab that front brake, your weight shifts to the front of the bike, which makes the back wheel lighter. Now, the height of your back wheel off the ground will ultimately determine how far you can pivot. But where we want to start with this whole thing is just a small endo to bring our back wheel off the ground. Now, the endo is an excellent way to get your back wheel off the ground, but what we really need to get is a little bit more control with our back wheel. And so the second thing we're going to work on is our back wheel lift. Now, the back wheel is already coming off the ground just because you're grabbing the front brake and pushing your weight forward. But where we want to guide it is with our back foot. So we do something that's called the pedal scoop, which is when we tip our toes down at the ground and we scoop back and up with those pedals, and that will help guide the back wheel into the air. You can add this into the endo, or you can do it rolling, where you roll along and scoop that back wheel into the air with your weight forward. Adding in that pedal scoop to the endo is going to give that back wheel lift so much more control. The third and most important element of the pivot is the twist of the front wheel. But there's a lot to unpack here. It's not as simple as just turning your wheel. In fact, this one step determines how far you can pivot and so much more. Let's dig into this part a little bit more. As you'd expect, you can pivot your bike in both directions. But what I'd recommend if you're first learning pivots is to learn it your strong side first. And your strong side means two things. Your front wheel is going to twist away from your front foot, and your back foot is going to help push your back wheel into place. The reason why it's important to learn your strong side first is that you're not going to get as much help from your wheel or from your back foot when you go in the opposite direction. But by the time you've locked in your strong side, your body has kind of got that muscle memory in place, and that will make it a lot easier to go in both directions. So that's why we want to learn the strong side first. So a pivot on our strong side means that we twist our front wheel away from our front foot, and then we scoop and lift our back wheel with our back foot and push it into place. So what you're doing is twisting the front wheel and then pushing that back wheel to straighten the bike out again. Let's move on by pulling together all these elements into a basic pivot. Don't worry yet about how far you can pivot, just see if you can get your back wheel to move just a little bit. So remember, we're going to do that small endo, we're going to lift the back wheel, and we're going to twist our front wheel kind of at the same time. That combination is going to force the back wheel to move and should get you started on this process. Once you feel like you've got that moving, then I've got two more drills that you can practice, which is going to help you build your control and confidence with the pivot. Once you've got your front wheel pivot technique worked out, we're going to introduce repetition in a drill called clocks. What clocks is a drill where you put your front wheel in the middle of the circle, grab your front brake and you pivot around the circle with your back wheel. Now at first you're going to do a lot of very, very small pivots, and you might get 2, 3 in a row, but eventually you'll be able to pivot a bunch of times in a row to go all the way around the circle. The repetition is important because it's going to help us build muscle memory with our body and our bike so that we can quickly pivot a couple times in a row. As we get better at it, we're also going to figure out how to get more distance so you don't have to do as many pivots to be able to make it around the circle. So it's kind of a double whammy. You're getting repetition, you're getting better at doing pivots, but you're also learning how to get just a little bit more distance. And the way that you would traditionally get more distance is by lifting that back wheel up in the air just a little bit higher so it has more time to kind of fall into place. The other drill that we can do is called pendulum, and this one's going to be a little bit more challenging because it's going to require you to be able to pivot in both directions. So what you'll do is find some sort of stick or line or something that you can pivot over, and then you're going to pivot back with your back wheel. So this one you need to be able to pivot in either direction to do, but again, it's a great way to introduce repetition to get your back wheel moving in either direction. Now you've got all the basics you need for lifting and moving your back wheel so that when you need it out on the trail, you can put that back wheel exactly where you need it to be. Make sure that you're practicing this at the trailhead before and after rides, or even out in front of your house between rides. Practice makes progress, and the more time you spend on this, the more control you're going to have on your bike. If you're looking for some other tips to improve your bike control and confidence on two wheels, check out some of my other tutorial videos on the Jenson USA channel.